You know that feeling when your phone buzzes and your stomach drops before you even look at the screen? That moment when someone cuts you off in traffic and suddenly your entire morning is ruined? Or when you're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, replaying that conversation from 5 years ago, wishing you'd said something different? I've been there. As someone who spent years leading an empire, making life and death decisions, watching people I loved betray me and people I trusted fall in battle, I understand what it means to feel like your peace of mind is hanging by a thread that could snap at any moment. And here's what I learned, what I wrote in my private journals, never intending for anyone else to read, what kept me sane when the weight of the world was literally on my shoulders. Inner peace isn't something you find. It's not hiding on some mountaintop waiting for you to discover it. It's not in the next promotion, the next relationship, the next vacation, or the next purchase. Inner peace is something you build, right here, right now, in the middle of the chaos. And today, I'm going to share with you 5 simple practices, 5 tools that you can use immediately, today, this very hour, to start experiencing a calm you might not have felt in years. These aren't complicated philosophical theories that require years of study. These are practical hacks, real techniques that work whether you're stuck in traffic, dealing with a difficult boss, worried about money, or just exhausted from the weight of everything you're carrying. I'm going to walk you through exactly how to use each one, and by the end of our time together, you're going to have a toolkit that can transform how you experience every single day of your life. So, take a deep breath with me right now. Let go of whatever you were thinking about before you started watching this, because what we're about to explore together has the power to change everything. I want to tell you about the most dangerous lie you've ever been told. It's not political. It's not religious. It's far more insidious because it operates beneath your conscious awareness, shaping every decision you make, every dream you abandon, every risk you refuse to take. The lie is this: that you are separate from the world around you, that somehow your skin is a boundary, that your thoughts belong only to you, that your success or failure happens in isolation. We've been taught to see ourselves as isolated islands, independent, self-contained, competing for scarce resources in a hostile universe. And this lie is killing us. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, like a poison that accumulates in your system over decades. It kills your creativity. It suffocates your joy. It breeds the anxiety that wakes you at 3 in the morning, wondering if you're enough, if you've done enough, if you'll ever be enough. Let me show you what I mean. Think about the last time you felt truly connected to another person. Maybe it was a conversation where you lost track of time. Maybe it was a moment of shared laughter or shared grief. In that moment, where did you end and they begin? You couldn't tell, could you? Because the boundary isn't real. It never was. You are not a thing inside your head, looking out at the world through the windows of your eyes. You are a process, a pattern of energy and information that extends far beyond your body. Every breath you take contains atoms that were once part of stars. The thoughts you think are shaped by every book you've read, every conversation you've had, every experience that's passed through your awareness. Your heartbeat synchronizes with people you love. Your neurons fire in patterns learned from those who raised you. This isn't philosophical speculation. This is measurable reality. Studies show that when you sit in a room with another person for just 20 minutes, your heart rhythms begin to align. When a mother holds her newborn, their breathing patterns synchronize within seconds. We are literally tuning into each other at a biological level, constantly. And yet we walk through life believing we're making choices in isolation. We think our thoughts are ours alone. We proudly declare our independence, our self-made success, our individual achievement. But strip away the language you speak learned from others. Remove the values you hold absorbed from your culture. Take away the skills you possess taught by teachers, mentors, strangers on the internet. What's left that's purely originally you. Even your rebellions aren't yours. The teenager who rejects their parents' values is still defining themselves in reaction to those values. The entrepreneur who claims to be self-made learned the concept of entrepreneurship from someone else. Your most radical ideas were sparked by words someone else spoke, wrote, or created. You are a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years, and you've been invited to participate for a brief moment. You didn't choose the language of the conversation. You didn't select the topics already under discussion when you arrived. You're adding your voice, yes, but even that voice was trained by the voices that came before. This is why isolation destroys us. This is why solitary confinement is considered torture. We're not designed to exist alone, because we don't actually exist alone. We exist as intersections, as meeting points, as living junctions where millions of influences converge. And here's what makes this beautiful rather than terrifying. If you are shaped by everything you encounter, then everything you encounter matters. Every conversation is redesigning your neural pathways. Every book is rewriting portions of your code. Every person you meet is leaving fingerprints on your consciousness that will remain long after they're gone. You're not losing yourself in this process. You're becoming yourself through it. The you that you are is the sum of 10,000 influences, and that doesn't make you less real. It makes you infinitely more complex. Think about the music you love. Not the music you're supposed to love, not the music that signals your tribe or your taste level, the music that actually moves you. I guarantee you can't fully explain why certain songs hit you the way they do. There's something in the combination of melody and memory, rhythm and recognition that bypasses your conscious mind entirely. You didn't choose to be moved by it. It chose you, or rather, you were already the kind of person who could be moved by it before you ever heard it. The same goes for the books that changed you, the films that wrecked you, the conversations that stayed with you for years. You think you discovered them, but really, they discovered something in you that was already there, waiting. Every meaningful piece of art or idea you've ever encountered didn't add something foreign to your soul. It revealed what was already present but dormant. This is why the whole concept of guilty pleasures is such a tragic misunderstanding. When you apologize for liking something, when you preface your enthusiasm with, "I know it's stupid," but you're not protecting yourself from judgment. You're rejecting a part of your own authentic response to the world. You're saying that the version of you that feels joy at that thing is somehow less valid than the version that's supposed to feel joy at the right things. But here's what's actually happening in those moments. You're feeling the weight of all those external voices, all those invisible judges, all those internalized rules about what a person like you is supposed to enjoy, and you're mistaking their presence in your head for your own judgment. You think you're embarrassed by your taste, but you're actually just afraid of being seen fully. The most radical thing you can do is stop curating yourself for an imaginary audience, because that's what most of our self-consciousness is, a performance for people who aren't even watching. We walk around with this exhausting internal monologue, constantly editing and revising our reactions, making sure we're being the right kind of person. And for what? For whom? For the approval of people who are barely paying attention? For the validation of a society that changes its mind about what's acceptable every few years anyway? Think about it. The person judging you for being too sensitive would have judged you for being too cold if you'd reacted differently. The culture that tells you to be yourself will mock you the moment yourself doesn't fit the template. We've built this elaborate performance for an audience that isn't even watching the show. They're too busy rehearsing their own lines. I used to know someone who would apologize for everything, not just the big things, but for existing in a space. "Sorry, can I just squeeze by? Sorry, is this seat taken? Sorry, I know this is a stupid question." Every sentence prefaced with an apology, as if taking up room in the world required permission. And you know what I noticed? The apologies didn't make people like them more. If anything, it made people respect them less. Because people can sense when you don't respect yourself. They can smell the desperation for approval like blood in the water. But here's the thing that really gets me. We do this to ourselves even when nobody's around. That's the truly maddening part. The performance has become so automatic that we've internalized the audience. We police our own thoughts now. We feel guilty for feeling angry. We feel ashamed for feeling proud. We've installed a little judge inside our heads who never takes a day off, never gives us the benefit of the doubt. You ever catch yourself alone, maybe singing in the car, and suddenly you get self-conscious, even though there's literally no one there to judge you? We've outsourced our self-worth for so long that we've forgotten we were ever the original authority on our own experience. I'll tell you what really gets me. We live in this bizarre paradox where we're more connected than ever, but more lonely. More informed, but less certain. We have 1,000 ways to express ourselves, and yet we're terrified to just be. Think about it. Your great-grandfather probably knew maybe 100 people in his entire life. His world was small, but his sense of self, pretty solid. He didn't need validation from strangers. He didn't check how many people liked his thoughts before deciding if they were worth having. Now, you post something online, and within seconds you're scanning for reactions, like a rat pressing a lever for food pellets. Each little notification giving you a hit of something that feels like connection, but leaves you emptier than before. And here's the really twisted part. You know it's empty. You times it. But you keep going back because at least it's something. At least it's proof that you exist in someone else's awareness, even if just for half a second. We've built these incredible tools for human connection, and we're using them to disappear, to curate and filter and edit ourselves into these polished, acceptable versions that barely resemble who we actually are. You're crafting tweets like you're defusing a bomb, terrified that one wrong word will detonate your entire social standing. And the exhausting part? You're doing this all day, every day. Every conversation is a performance. Every photo is a referendum on your worth. Every silence feels like evidence of your irrelevance. You're running this constant cost-benefit analysis. If I say this, will they still like me? If I don't say that, will they think I don't care? You've turned your entire existence into a focus group. But here's what nobody's saying. The people whose approval you're chasing, they're doing the exact same thing. They're just as terrified, just as uncertain, just as desperate to be seen and accepted. You're all performing for each other, and nobody's actually watching because they're too busy with their own performance. It's like being in a room full of mirrors, looking for a real face. And here's what really got to me. The algorithms figured this out before we did. They saw what we couldn't see in ourselves. The platform doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about your engagement. And what keeps you engaged? Not contentment, not peace, not satisfaction. Those emotions make you close the app. The algorithm learned that anxiety keeps you scrolling. Envy keeps you watching. That little sting of inadequacy when you see someone's vacation photos, that's exactly what the platform wants you to feel, because that feeling makes you stay, makes you post your own photos to neutralize the sting, makes you check back to see who validated your attempt at looking happy. I started noticing how the app would show me certain types of content right when I was feeling vulnerable. Had a long day at work? Here's someone your age who just bought their third property, feeling good about finishing a project. Here's someone who finished 3 projects before breakfast and still had time to look flawless. The algorithm became like a toxic friend who knew exactly which insecurities to poke. And we let it. We keep letting it, because we've convinced ourselves that this is connection, this is community, this is staying in touch. But when I really examined my relationships, the people I felt closest to weren't the ones I saw most on social media. They were the ones I actually talked to. The ones who knew what was happening in my life beyond the highlight reel. I had this friend, we'd been close for years. Then social media happened. Suddenly, instead of calling each other, we'd just like each other's posts. Instead of actual conversations, we'd leave comments. Love this. So proud of you. These little bursts of abbreviated emotion that felt like connection, but contained nothing real. The algorithm learned exactly what to show us. It didn't show us our friends' struggle with depression or their parents' illness. It showed us their vacation photos, their promotions, their perfect Sunday brunch. We started curating ourselves for an audience, performing our lives rather than living them. I remember watching my own behavior change. I'd be at dinner with friends, and someone would say something funny, and my first instinct wasn't to laugh, it was to think, how can I turn this into a post? I was living my life through a lens that didn't exist yet, already composing the caption, already imagining the engagement. We stopped calling to check in. We figured if something important happened, we'd see it online. But here's what social media doesn't show you: the quiet desperation of someone who needs to talk but doesn't know how to reach out anymore. The weight of loneliness that doesn't photograph well. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon when you realize you haven't had a real conversation in weeks. Our friendships became performance reviews. We kept score in likes and comments. If you posted something personal and it didn't get enough engagement, it felt like your pain didn't matter. Like if the crowd didn't validate it, maybe it wasn't real. And the comparison god, the comparison. We weren't just comparing our lives to our friends anymore. We were comparing ourselves to everyone. To influencers, to celebrities, to carefully curated highlight reels that bore no resemblance to anyone's actual existence. We were running a race against illusions. I watched friendships dissolve into mutual surveillance. We'd scroll through each other's lives, keeping tabs, keeping score, keeping distance. You'd see your best friend from college got engaged, and instead of hearing her voice tell you, you'd see it announced to 300 people at once. Your reaction became one of many. Your joy, your surprise, your love, just another comment in the thread. The irony twisted like a knife. We were more connected than ever, and more alone than we'd ever been. And slowly, we stopped trying. Because we learned through the silence of ignored messages, through the asymmetry of care, through watching others perform for audiences while we bled in private, that vulnerability wasn't rewarded anymore. It was just content, data, something to scroll past on the way to something more entertaining. I remember the first time I chose not to share something meaningful. A genuine accomplishment, something I'd worked months to achieve. I opened the app, started typing, then stopped. The question hit me: who will actually care about this? And I realized I couldn't name 5 people who would engage with it authentically. But I could name 100 who might double tap it reflexively while thinking about something else entirely. So I kept it to myself. And it felt strange, this private joy in a public world. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule. Like if it didn't exist online, maybe it didn't count. That's when the loneliness calcified into something else. Resignation. We adapted. We learned to curate carefully, to share only what was safe, what was polished, what wouldn't reveal too much need or too much humanity. We became performers in our own lives, even when the audience had stopped watching. The platforms kept telling us we had hundreds, thousands of connections. But late at night, when the real crisis hit, when the breakup happened, when the diagnosis came, we stared at those numbers and felt their profound emptiness. A contact list isn't a community. Followers aren't friends. And the heart knows the difference, even when the algorithm doesn't. We tried to fix it with more. More apps, more platforms, more networking. We joined Discord servers and Slack communities. We scheduled Zoom hangouts and virtual coffee chats. We added structure to spontaneity, spreadsheets to friendship. And still, something essential was missing. Because you can't engineer intimacy. You can't optimize your way into belonging. The very act of trying, of managing relationships like projects, of tracking interactions like metrics was part of the problem. We'd become so efficient at connecting that we'd forgotten how to simply be with each other. The silence that followed this realization wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, heavy with the weight of what needed to change. I started conducting what I called digital autopsies on my own behavior. I'd go through my phone at the end of each day, looking at every notification I'd responded to, every message I'd sent. And I'd ask myself one question. The answer was disturbing more often than not. I found conversations where I'd responded with the perfect emoji, but couldn't remember what the person had actually said. Group chats where I'd reacted to 20 messages but couldn't recall a single topic discussed. Comments I'd left on posts that I'd scrolled past so quickly, I couldn't have told you what the image showed. I was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, a ghost haunting my own social life. But here's what really broke through. I remembered my grandfather's funeral. This was years ago, before smartphones had fully colonized our attention. And I remembered how times were times at that funeral, how they sat with discomfort, how they let silences stretch out, how they held space for grief without trying to fix it or move past it or document it for later consumption. Nobody was optimizing their condolences. Nobody was workshopping the perfect thing to say. They were just there, imperfectly, awkwardly, beautifully there. When had we lost that? When had presence become a performance metric rather than a gift? I thought about the last time someone had truly surprised me, not with a planned gesture or a scheduled call, but with genuine spontaneity. It had been months, maybe longer. Everything had become so choreographed, so anticipated. We'd automated serendipity right out of existence. The people I loved had become algorithms I'd learned to predict, and I'd become one to them. This wasn't connection. This was synchronized isolation, dressed up in the language of community. We'd built elaborate systems to avoid the one thing that actually creates intimacy, vulnerability without a safety net. Real belonging, I was beginning to understand, required something we'd designed our entire digital infrastructure to eliminate risk. The algorithms knew this, of course. They'd figured out something profound about human nature. We crave connection, but we fear rejection more. So they gave us a masterstroke of product design, the illusion of community without the cost of commitment. Every feature was optimized for what they called engagement, but what they really meant was something more sinister. The sweet spot between loneliness and belonging, where people refresh endlessly but never quite arrive. I watched this play out in real time with Alex, a guy I'd known since college. On paper, his life was a masterclass in modern connection. 4,000 friends, active in dozens of groups. Always commenting, always present, always times there, times in that digital sense. But when his father died, when he actually needed someone to sit with him in the suffocating silence of grief, his phone stayed quiet. All those connections, all that community, it evaporated like morning fog. He told me later it felt like screaming in a crowded room where everyone was wearing headphones. Because here's what the platforms never advertised. They'd gamified connection so successfully that we'd forgotten how to recognize the real thing. We'd trained ourselves to measure belonging in metrics that had nothing to do with actual human presence. Likes became love. Shares became support. And we accepted this trade because the alternative, showing up imperfectly, being truly seen, required a kind of courage that felt increasingly archaic. The loneliness crisis wasn't happening despite our connectivity. It was happening because of how we'd redefined connection itself. We'd created a world where you could have 1,000 conversations and never be truly heard, where you could share your life with millions and still feel completely unknown. The platforms had sold us community while systematically removing every element that made community actually function: the awkwardness, the commitment, the inability to simply log off when things got complicated. And the cruelest part? We'd begun to prefer it this way. I remember watching my son play online with his friends last winter. 7 kids, spread across different houses, all wearing headsets, all laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. And I thought, this is amazing. He's maintaining friendships despite physical distance, despite schedules that don't align, despite winter weather keeping everyone inside. Then one of his friends said something that hurt him. Not bullying exactly. And my son, instead of responding, instead of working through it, just muted him, clicked a button, and the problem disappeared. He kept playing with the others, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to tell him that wasn't how conflict worked, that relationships required friction, required repair. But then I thought about my own behavior, the colleague whose emails I'd been ignoring, the group chat I'd muted after a political disagreement, the friend whose calls I let go to voicemail because the conversations had become too heavy. I was teaching him exactly what to do, not through my words, but through the demonstrated reality of how adults now navigate discomfort. We don't work through it, we design around it. The tech companies would say they're just responding to what we want, and they're not wrong. Every feature that lets us avoid awkwardness gets adopted immediately. Read receipts you can turn off, stories that disappear, DMs you can unsend. We've built an entire infrastructure around the assumption that human connection should come with an undo button. But something strange happens when every interaction becomes reversible. We stop committing to any of them. Why invest in difficult conversations when you can just find easier ones? Why develop the skills to repair relationships when you can simply refresh your social circle? I think about my grandmother, who lived in the same small town for 60 years. She couldn't curate her community. She had to live alongside people she disagreed with, people who annoyed her, people whose politics made her crazy. And somehow, they all still showed up for each other's funerals. They still helped each other move. They still existed in a shared reality that demanded accommodation. That world had its own problems, obviously, its own forms of forced conformity and silent suffering. But it also had something we've lost: the simple understanding that you don't get to choose all the people in your life, and that's actually a feature, not a bug. Because here's what happens when you curate all your relationships. You build a world where everyone agrees with you, where every conversation confirms what you already believe, where challenge and friction, the very things that shape us, that sand down our rough edges, are eliminated in favor of comfort. My grandmother used to say something that stuck with me. She'd say, "If everybody in the room thinks exactly like you, somebody isn't thinking." And she was right. The disagreement, the awkwardness, the uncle who sees the world completely differently than you do, these weren't obstacles to relationship. They were the point of it. They were how you learned that your perspective wasn't the only one, that your truth wasn't universal, that the world was bigger and more complex than the small circle of your own experience. There's a reason why we've become so fragile, so easily offended, so unable to handle disagreement. It's because we've engineered a social world where disagreement simply doesn't exist, where the first sign of friction means unfollow, unfriend, remove. We've turned relationship into a perpetual audition where everyone is performing for everyone else, terrified that one wrong word will get them cut from the show. And look, I'm not romanticizing the past. I'm not saying we should go back to toxic family dynamics where abuse was tolerated because family is family. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the difference between necessary boundaries and total isolation, between protecting yourself from genuine harm and insulating yourself from anything uncomfortable. The algorithm can't tell the difference between those two things. It just knows. This makes you feel bad. Remove it. This makes you feel good. More of it. But a good life, a rich, textured, meaningful life, requires both. It requires safety and challenge. comfort, and growth. People who love you unconditionally, and people who will tell you the truth even when it stings. You can't get that from a feed of people who only exist to validate you. And here's what most people don't realize. Real connection requires something social media has trained us to avoid: discomfort. The willingness to be misunderstood. To have a conversation where you don't immediately get the dopamine hit of agreement. I remember sitting across from someone I'd known for years, and we got into this heated discussion about something we fundamentally disagreed on, and my first instinct, I'm being honest here, was to shut it down, to change the subject. Because conflict feels dangerous when you've been trained to think everyone should always affirm you. But we stayed in it, we kept talking, and something incredible happened. I didn't change my mind, and neither did they, but I understood them in a way I never had before. I saw the experiences that shaped their view. I saw their humanity beyond their opinion. That's intimacy. That's real connection. And it's the exact opposite of what happens online, where disagreement means you block, unfollow, or write someone off completely. Social media has given us the language of connection, friends, followers, community, while stripping away the actual experience of it. It's like handing someone a menu and telling them they've eaten a meal. You want to reclaim your life? Start rebuilding real relationships. Not transactional ones, not networks, not mutuals. Actual friendships where you know someone's middle name and their weird fear of birds and what their laugh sounds like when they're truly surprised. Call someone instead of texting. Show up at their door. Sit in the same room and just exist together without performing or documenting it. Because here's the thing, when you're on your deathbed, and I know that sounds dramatic, but bear with me, you're not going to wish you'd gotten more likes. You're not going to scroll through your archive of stories. You're going to think about the people who knew you, really knew you, the ones who saw you at your worst and stayed, the ones who made you laugh until you couldn't breathe. That's what we're trading away. That's the cost nobody talks about. And here's what kills me: we've convinced ourselves this is time's normal asterisk, that this is just what life looks like now. We see someone at dinner scrolling through their phone while their partner sits across from them in silence, and we don't even blink. We watch a father at the park, eyes glued to his screen while his daughter calls, "Dad, watch me," for the 5th time, and we think, yeah, that's just how it is. But it's not. It doesn't have to be. I think about my grandfather sometimes. He died before smartphones existed, and you know what I remember most about him? He was time's present asterisk. When you talked to him, he looked at you. Really looked at you. Not past you, not through you at times you. Like what you were saying was the most important thing in the world at that moment. There was no device in his pocket vibrating with notifications, no little red bubbles demanding his attention, no algorithmic feed engineered to keep him scrolling just one more minute. He had his whole mind available for the people in front of him. That's a luxury we've forgotten even exists. And I know what you're thinking, but Marcus, we can't go back. Technology is here to stay. You're right, we can't uninvent the smartphone, but we can decide how we use it. We can decide whether it's a tool we control or a leash that controls us. Because right now, for most of us, it's a leash. We jump when it buzzes. We panic when the battery hits 10%. We feel phantom vibrations in our pockets when the phone isn't even there. That's not mastery. That's addiction wearing a respectable suit. And the thing is, these companies know times this. They have teams of engineers whose entire job is to make these apps as addictive as possible. They study the same psychological triggers that slot machines use. The variable rewards, the infinite scroll, the fear of missing out. They've weaponized human psychology against us, and we're walking around acting like we're just staying connected. But here's where it gets truly insidious. We've convinced ourselves that this is what connection looks like, that watching someone's curated highlight reel is the same as being present in their life. That liking a photo is the same as showing up when they need you. I remember my own wake-up call. A friend I'd been following religiously on Instagram. I saw everything, the vacations, the promotions, the perfect brunch plates. I felt connected. I felt like I knew what was happening in their life. Then we ran into each other at a coffee shop, and within 5 minutes of actual conversation, they told me they'd been struggling with severe anxiety for months. That they'd been in therapy. That several nights they'd sat alone, wondering if anyone would even notice if they disappeared. And there I was, someone who thought they were keeping up with this person, completely blindsided. Because I wasn't connected to them at all. I was connected to their performance, their avatar. The version of themselves they felt obligated to broadcast to feel relevant. This is what we've traded real relationship for. The illusion of connection with none of the substance. We know what everyone had for lunch, but we don't know what keeps them up at night. We see their vacation photos, but we don't know their fears. We watch their success stories, but we're absent for their struggles. And the platforms love this arrangement. They've turned human connection into something that can be measured, monetized, and manipulated. Every interaction reduced to data points. Every relationship filtered through an algorithm designed not to bring you closer to others, but to keep you scrolling. The ancient Stoics talked about the difference between what's in our control and what isn't. They understood that true connection, real human relationship, requires presence, vulnerability, effort. It can't be outsourced to an algorithm. It can't be automated. It requires us to show up, imperfectly and authentically, in real time. And here's what nobody tells you about showing up. It doesn't feel noble in the moment. It feels ordinary. Sometimes it feels tedious. The parent who sits through the 10th retelling of the same story their child is excited about isn't thinking, "I'm building neural pathways of security." They're just there, listening, again. The friend who responds to the 2 a.m. text isn't calculating the value of loyalty. They're tired, but they show up anyway. The teacher who stays late to explain a concept one more time, in one more way, until it finally clicks. They're not composing a TED talk in their head. They're just trying different words until something lands. This is the unglamorous truth about human connection. It doesn't always feel profound while it's happening, but years later, that child remembers being heard. That friend remembers not being alone. That student remembers someone believing they could understand. We underestimate the compound interest of ordinary presence. Every civilization that forgot this learned the same lesson. You can build the most sophisticated communication network in history, but if people stop knowing how to communicate, the infrastructure becomes a monument to irony. Ancient Rome had roads connecting every corner of the empire, yet, in its final years, trust between citizens had eroded so completely that those same roads became pathways for division rather than unity. We have fiber optic cables crossing oceans, satellites orbiting the planet, devices in every pocket, and yet we're experiencing an epidemic of loneliness that previous generations couldn't have imagined. The technology worked, the connection didn't. Because connection requires something technology can only facilitate, never replace: the willingness to be affected by another person, to let their reality change yours, even slightly. When you truly listen to someone, you're agreeing to be inconvenienced by their perspective, to have your assumptions questioned, to hold space for an experience that isn't yours. This is why superficial interaction is so seductive. It costs nothing, demands nothing, changes nothing. Real connection asks for everything we're taught to protect: our time, our attention, our certainty, our comfort. It asks us to sit in rooms where nothing is resolved, to witness suffering we cannot fix, to hold questions instead of answers. Most people turn away at that threshold. I did, for years. I had a friend, really, more than a friend. Someone who'd been there through the worst stretches, who started struggling with something I didn't understand. Or something deeper. something that didn't have a clean name. And every time we talked, I'd try to fix it. I'd send articles, suggest therapists, offer solutions wrapped in concern, until one night he just stopped responding. Not dramatically, he didn't block me or cut me off, he just drifted. And I remember feeling this defensive anger, like I'd done everything right. I'd shown up. I'd tried to help. What more could he want? It took me months to realize he didn't need my solutions. He needed me to stop being so terrified of his pain that I had to fix it. Real connection doesn't flinch. It doesn't fill silence with advice. It sits in the uncomfortable truth that some things don't get better with a 5-step plan and a positive attitude. We've trained ourselves to be fixers because sitting with uncertainty feels like failure. Think about how we respond when someone shares something difficult. Have you tried? What you should do is, I read this thing that said, we're not listening, we're defending ourselves against the possibility that pain can exist without a solution. That connection sometimes means bearing witness to what we cannot change. The Stoics understood this, not through cold detachment, but through radical acceptance. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about mortality, suffering, impermanence, not to depress himself, but to prepare himself to be present with reality as it is, not as he wished it to be. That's the work, not transcendence, presence. You want a sign that you're making progress? Look for this. You stop needing the sign. The validation you once craved, someone telling you you're doing well, that you matter, that you're on the right path, begins to feel hollow. Not because you've become arrogant, but because you've found something sturdier to stand on than someone else's approval. I used to write for myself every morning, observations, reminders, things I needed to hear. No one was meant to read them. They weren't polished, they weren't profound. They were just true. Small truths I needed to remember when the day tried to convince me otherwise. Don't let your imagination be crushed by life as a whole. Don't try to picture everything bad that could possibly happen. Ask yourself in each instance, what is it about this situation that I find unbearable? That's what I wrote one morning. Because I was overwhelmed, because the weight of responsibility felt like it would crack my chest open, and I realized most of what I was carrying wasn't real. It was speculation, catastrophe I'd invented. So I put it down. Not all of it, just the imaginary weight. You do this too. You catastrophize. You mourn losses you haven't experienced. Stop, not because it's weak to worry, but because it's wasteful. You only have so much capacity. Why spend it on phantoms? Here's what changed for me. I stopped asking, what if everything goes wrong? And started asking, what is actually required of me right now? Right now, not tomorrow, not in the cascading disaster I've imagined. Right now. And the answer was always smaller than I feared. Manageable. Human-sized. Make a decision. Have a difficult conversation. Sit with discomfort without trying to fix it immediately. Let someone be angry without absorbing their anger as my failure. That's it. That's all that was ever asked of me in any given moment. The rest? Noise. You'll find the same thing. When you strip away the projection, the fantasy, the endless what-ifs, what remains is almost always something you can handle. Not easily. And that's enough. That distinction matters more than we usually admit. We confuse ease with ability. We think if something doesn't come naturally, we shouldn't attempt it. But the things that test us, that require deliberate effort and patient practice, these are often the things that define us most deeply. Consider the emperor, who must mediate between warring generals. He cannot simply say what he feels. He must weigh consequences, consider precedents, manage egos larger than provinces. His natural inclination might be to choose sides swiftly, to punish the one clearly in error. But capability requires him to look further, To understand that both men are weapons he needs sharp, that unity matters more than being right, that today's verdict sets tomorrow's pattern. This is not easy work. It is work done against the grain of impulse, against the satisfaction of immediate judgment. But it is work he is capable of doing, and so he does it. I've watched you do this too, in smaller arenas that feel just as vast. The co-worker whose incompetence makes your days harder, you could humiliate them in a meeting. It would feel justified. It would feel good, briefly. Instead, you pull them aside. You explain, patiently, what they're missing. You do this not because it's easy, but because you're capable of seeing that cruelty would diminish both of you. The friend going through crisis, who needs the same reassurance for the 10th time, you could grow frustrated. You could remind them that you've said this before, that they're not listening, that you have your own problems. Instead, you say it again. You understand that healing is not linear, that sometimes people need to hear the same truth in 10 different moments before it finally takes root. These are acts of capability, small emperorship over your own reactions, sovereignty over the easier, lesser version of yourself. And here is what philosophy gives you that nothing else can. Not permission to escape, permission to stay, to remain present in the room where your child speaks, to hold the gaze of someone you have disappointed, to sit with your own errors without the numbing distraction of another scroll, another drink, another imagined future where you are somehow different without having done the work of difference. The Stoics called this times prosoche, times attention, continuous attention to the present moment and to your own judgments about it, not meditation as withdrawal. I practiced this in the tent between battles. While others drank or boasted, I would sit and examine a single thought. This man insulted me. Then I would dissect it like a surgeon opening a wound to clean it. Did he insult times me asterisk, or did he speak words that I then chose to receive as diminishment? What power did I grant him in that interpretation? What alternative reading exists? Not to excuse wrongdoing, but to see clearly what belongs to him and what belongs to me. Your power lives in that gap between event and interpretation, that half-second where meaning has not yet solidified, where you can still choose which story to tell yourself. Most people never see that gap. The stimulus and their reaction feel like a single thing. Someone cuts them off in traffic and they are times enraged before they can even notice the rage forming. But you can train this gap wider. Slow down the space between provocation and response. Insert consciousness where there was only reflex. This is the work, not transcendence. Granular attention to the mechanism of your own mind. And when you fail, and you will fail, today, tomorrow, 1,000 times, philosophy gives you the framework to fail without despair, to see failure as data rather than identity, to say, I lost my temper without adding, and therefore I am worthless. The distinction matters infinitely. One permits learning, the other only permits shame. And shame is just pride inverted. Another way the ego makes everything about itself. So much of what we call virtue is really just image management. The person who donates publicly but walks past suffering when no one's watching. The one who posts inspirational quotes but tears down colleagues in private meetings. The spiritual seeker who meditates for 2 hours but screams at their family over dinner. I've caught myself in this hypocrisy more times than I can count. Writing about compassion in my journal at dawn, then snapping at a servant before noon. It's almost comical if it weren't so revealing. The gap between who we want to appear to be and who we actually are in unguarded moments, that's where the real work lives. The Stoics understood something profound here. They didn't talk much about reputation, they talked about character. And character is what you do when reputation is impossible. It's how you treat the person who can do nothing for you. It's whether you keep your word when breaking it would be convenient and undetectable. It's the thoughts you entertain when you're completely alone. This is why the practice of self-examination was central to their philosophy, not to flagellate yourself with guilt, but to see clearly, to notice the gap between your values and your actions without judgment, and then to close it incrementally. I think about this when I'm tempted to be harsh with someone. There's a moment before I speak where I can ask, am I about to say this because it needs to be said, or because I'm tired and they're convenient? Am I correcting them or punishing them? Am I teaching or dominating? Most of the time, if I'm honest, it's the latter. And in that honesty, the harsh words lose their urgency. They reveal themselves as what they are, my own discomfort looking for an exit wound. The same applies to praise. Am I complimenting this person because I genuinely appreciate them, or because I want something? Because it makes me look magnanimous? Because I'm managing my reputation as a kind person? Even our generosity can be corrupted by ego, especially our generosity. And here's what's insidious about this: once you start performing virtue instead of practicing it, you lose access to the very peace that virtue is supposed to provide. You're constantly checking, constantly measuring. Did they see? Did they notice? Will they remember? The act itself brings no satisfaction, because the satisfaction was supposed to come from external validation that never quite arrives. Or worse, it arrives, and it's still not enough. I see this constantly in how people talk about their principles. They don't just hold them, they perform them. Every conversation becomes a demonstration. Every interaction, an opportunity to showcase their moral sophistication. And you can feel it, can't you? That slight performative edge. The way they're not really listening to you, they're waiting for their moment to display how thoughtful they are, how nuanced their position is. Real virtue is quiet, not because it's hiding, but because it doesn't need an audience. When you help someone and truly expect nothing in return, not even recognition, there's a cleanness to it, a completion. The act itself closes the circle. You helped because helping was the right thing, and now it's done. Finished. You can move on. But when you help someone and immediately start thinking about how to mention it, or position yourself where others will notice, or craft the story for maximum impact, you're not done. You're just beginning a new transaction. And that transaction will never close because external validation is an infinite treadmill. There's always another person to impress, another audience to perform for. The Stoics understood this deeply. They talked about doing good as the vine produces grapes, naturally, without announcement, without keeping score. The grapevine doesn't hold a press conference about its harvest. It just produces grapes because that's what grapevines do. And when you operate from your nature, from genuine character rather than calculated image, there's a freedom in it that no amount of applause can provide. This is why the most genuinely good people I know are often the least interested in talking about their goodness, not because they're modest in that false, fishing for compliments way, but because the good they do is simply part of how they move through the world. It's not a separate performance, it's woven into the fabric of who they are. They don't need to announce it any more than they need to announce that they're breathing. And perhaps that's what makes them so powerful in our lives, the fact that their goodness doesn't come with conditions or commentary. It simply exists, like gravity or light. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to qualify for it. It's just there, steady and unwavering, even when you stumble, even when you doubt yourself, even when the world feels too heavy to carry alone. I think about the people who've shown up for me in moments when I didn't even know I needed someone. Not with grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but with something quieter, a text that arrived at exactly the right time, a conversation that didn't try to fix me, but just held space for whatever I was feeling, a presence that asked for nothing and gave everything. These weren't people trying to be heroes. They were simply being human in the fullest sense of the word, and that's the paradox, isn't it? The most extraordinary acts of goodness often feel the most ordinary to the people performing them. They don't see themselves as special. They're just doing what feels right, what feels natural, what aligns with the kind of person they've chosen to become. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Maybe we've been conditioned to think that goodness requires fanfare, that kindness needs an audience, that generosity only counts if someone's keeping score. But the people who've actually shaped our lives, who've made us feel seen, valued, understood, they operated by a completely different set of rules. They understood that the most profound impact happens in the margins, in the spaces between the spotlights, in moments so small they barely register as moments at all. They knew that showing up matters more than showing off, that consistency trumps spectacle, that the quiet accumulation of small, genuine acts builds something far more lasting than any single grand gesture ever could. And perhaps that's the secret they understood that we've forgotten in our age of instant everything. We've been conditioned to believe that significant change requires significant drama. That transformation needs to be documented, announced, celebrated publicly. But the Romans who lived by these principles knew better. They understood that the most profound transformations happen in silence, in the small choices we make when no one is watching, in the discipline we maintain when there's no audience to applaud. Think about how a river carves a canyon. It's not through sudden violence, but through persistent presence. Water flowing over stone, day after day, year after year, century after century. Each individual day, nothing seems to change. But given enough time, that gentle persistence creates something magnificent. That's what your daily practice does. That's what your journal becomes. Not a record of extraordinary moments, but a testament to ordinary persistence. Not a highlight reel, but an honest account of someone showing up again and again, even when, especially when it's difficult. I've seen people transform their entire lives through nothing more dramatic than 15 minutes each morning with a journal. Not because those 15 minutes contained magic, but because they created a ritual of self-reflection that compounded over time. One person I knew started journaling during a period of profound anxiety. Nothing fancy, just writing down 3 things each morning: what he was worried about, what he could control about it, and what he'd do that day. The first week, his entries were repetitive, almost identical. The same worries, the same limited sense of control, the same small actions, but he kept going. Week after week, month after month, year after year. And slowly, so slowly, he almost didn't notice things began to shift. Not because the world suddenly decided to be kinder, not because fate intervened with some miraculous turnaround, but because he changed how he moved through that world. He stopped waiting for permission to heal. He stopped expecting someone to rescue him from his own mind. He took ownership, real ownership of his recovery. The medications helped, the therapy helped, but what helped most was the daily choice to keep showing up for himself, even when every fiber of his being screamed to stay in bed. He learned something crucial that most people never grasp. Healing isn't linear. There were good weeks, followed by terrible months. There were breakthroughs, followed by setbacks that felt like complete regression. But he didn't quit, because he finally understood what Marcus Aurelius knew 2,000 years ago. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. His depression became his teacher. It taught him empathy in a way nothing else could. It gave him a depth of understanding about human suffering that transformed how he connected with others. Where he once felt nothing, he now felt everything, and he learned to channel that intensity into purpose. He started writing again, not the forced, performative writing he'd done before, but raw, honest reflections on what he was experiencing. He shared his story publicly, terrified of judgment, expecting silence or mockery. Instead, he received hundreds of messages from people saying, "Me too. I thought I was alone." His vulnerability gave others permission to be vulnerable. His honesty created space for others to be honest. he discovered what Stoicism really means, not suppressing emotion, but transforming it, not avoiding pain, but moving through it with intention. He built a life he didn't need to escape from, not a perfect life, not a life free from challenges or darkness, but a life with meaning woven into its fabric. He found work that mattered to him. He cultivated relationships based on authenticity rather than pretense. He established routines that supported his mental health rather than sabotaging it. And perhaps most importantly, he forgave himself for the lost years, for the mistakes made in the fog of depression, for not being who he thought he should be. He accepted himself as he was, scars and all. And what changed wasn't the world around him. The world remained indifferent, chaotic, full of pain and beauty in equal measure. What changed was his relationship to it all. He stopped demanding that life conform to his expectations. He stopped insisting that he should be further along, more accomplished, less broken. He learned to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for a solution, to feel anxiety without catastrophizing, to experience sadness without declaring himself defective. These feelings, he realized, weren't evidence of failure, they were evidence of being alive. The Stoics had a phrase for this: amor fati times love of fate. Not passive resignation, but active embrace of what is. It doesn't mean you stop trying to improve things. It means you stop torturing yourself over the gap between reality and your fantasies of how things should be. This is perhaps the hardest lesson depression teaches: that acceptance is not defeat, that making peace with your limitations is not the same as giving up, that you can acknowledge where you are while still moving forward. He started small, one decision at a time, one day at a time, not because he believed in motivational slogans, but because it was the only way he knew how to continue. The grand visions, the sweeping transformations, they'd all failed him. What remained was the unglamorous work of showing up. Some days, showing up meant getting out of bed. Other days, it meant having a difficult conversation, or setting a boundary, or simply choosing not to spiral into self-criticism when things didn't go perfectly. These small acts of defiance against his own worst impulses, this was the real work. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. Not a lightning bolt of revelation, not a miraculous cure, just a slight loosening of the grip that depression had held on his life. Days came when he didn't think about it at all, then weeks. But here's what the self-help books don't tell you: recovery isn't linear. The depression didn't simply disappear like morning fog. It would return, sometimes for days, sometimes for months. But each time, he was a little more prepared, a little less afraid, because he'd learned something crucial: he could survive it. He had survived it, and he would survive it again. That's the paradox of resilience. It's not built in the absence of pain, but in the presence of it. It's forged in the moments when you face the thing you fear most and discover that while it hurts, while it's difficult, while every fiber of your being wants to run, you can stand there and endure it. Think about the first time you confronted something you'd been avoiding. Not the dramatic Hollywood version where music swells and everything changes instantly. The real version, the messy one, where you walked into that difficult conversation with your voice shaking, where you sat with that uncomfortable emotion instead of numbing it away, where you did the thing despite the fear, despite the discomfort, despite every instinct screaming at you to retreat. You probably didn't feel heroic. You probably felt terrified, but you did it anyway. And something shifted. Not everything, maybe. Not instantly, certainly. But somewhere deep in your nervous system, a message was recorded. I can do hard things. I can feel uncomfortable and survive. I can face what I've been running from. This is where transformation actually lives. Not in the grand gestures or the perfect plans, but in these small acts of showing up despite the fear. In choosing to stay when everything in you wants to flee. in breathing through the panic instead of letting it control you. The man began practicing this deliberately. When anxiety came, and it still came, it always would, he wouldn't immediately reach for the escape hatch. He'd pause, breathe, notice it. There you are, he'd say to the sensation. I know you. You're trying to protect me, but I've got this. Not fighting it, not pretending it wasn't there, just acknowledging it and moving forward anyway. He started small, a phone call he'd been dreading, a social situation that made him uncomfortable. Each time, the same pattern. Fear would rise, he'd acknowledge it, and then he'd do it anyway. And each time, he collected evidence that he was stronger than his anxiety told him he was. The liberation wasn't in the anxiety disappearing. It was in realizing he didn't need it to disappear. He could carry it with him and still live his life. He could feel afraid and still move forward. The anxiety didn't have to be solved or fixed or eliminated. It just had to be accepted as part of the experience. I began to see courage not as the absence of fear, but as friendship with it. The warrior who trembles before battle but raises his sword anyway. The lover who risks rejection. The artist who shares work knowing it might be scorned. They are not fearless. They are intimate with fear. And here is what they understand, that the anxious mind resists. Fear, when acknowledged, loses its power to paralyze. When I stopped fighting my anxiety, something extraordinary happened. The energy I had been using to resist it, to push it away, to argue with it, to hate myself for having it, that energy became available for living. I could feel nervous and make the phone call. I could feel uncertain and make the decision. I could feel exposed and tell the truth anyway. The anxiety became like weather. Some days stormy, some days calm. I stopped taking it personally. I stopped making it mean something was wrong with me. It was just happening, as clouds happen. And when I stopped resisting what was happening, I discovered something underneath the anxiety. Something that had been there all along, waiting quietly beneath the noise. Peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on perfect conditions. Not the conditional peace that shatters when circumstances shift, but the deep peace that exists in spite of circumstances. The peace that is not the opposite of anxiety, but the ground beneath it. This is the peace that the Stoics spoke of, the peace that comes not from controlling the external world, but from accepting it, from understanding that life will always contain uncertainty, loss, change, and fear, and that none of this need disturb the essential core of who you are. The anxiety still comes. I want to be honest about that. There are still moments when my chest tightens, when the thoughts spiral, when the old patterns resurface. But now I see them differently. They are not evidence of failure. They are not proof that I'm broken. They are simply the way my nervous system has learned to respond to a world it once needed to be vigilant in.